Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Lucy and I'm a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, and today I'm going to show you and talk you through how I make notes for my PhD, how I do my research, and basically take you from first discovering an article all the way through to outlining my first chapter. So I hope you enjoy this. So the first thing I do when I find an article I'm interested in, for example this one on hegemonic masculinity by R.W. Connell and James W. Messerschmidt, is I put it into this software called Zotero. I think that's how you pronounce it. So the reason I do this is because basically it means I don't have to worry later on about finding the right bibliographic information or making sure I've cited something correctly. You can download this. I've actually created a library called Queer Romances, and then as you can see I've split it up into MISC, primary text, queer theory, romance scholarship. And the reason I've done that is just so that when I'm looking through I can kind of more easily find things, because those are kind of the three, I suppose, main categories, and then MISC is obviously anything that doesn't fit into those categories. So this one on hegemonic masculinity, rethinking the concept, I'm going to put into queer theory. So it's a journal article.
In the title, hegemonic masculinity, rethinking the concept, and this is obviously by Connell, W.R.W. I can type. And I need to add another author, Messerschmidt, James W. It was published by the Gender and Society volume, so that is the publication. Gender and Society. It was volume number 19. I can see this down here in this section. It was issue number 6, and it was pages 829 to 859. The date was, I don't tend to put the month, I just put the year. I don't know if that's correct, but I've never seen a bibliography that asks for that particular, normally they just ask for the year, so I just keep a record of the year. If I needed the month for whatever reason, I can always go back and have a look. And then I just put in the DOI, which I normally try and copy if it lets me, because I don't want to get things wrong, but sometimes, depending on the where you're getting information from, you can't always copy it, but I think in this case I can. Okay.
So that is it all loaded into Zotero. So the next step I do is I have a Word document with all my notes in it. Now, this document is already 166 pages and over 63,000 words, so it is very long. And that is an issue. Obviously, Control Find is really great. So although I make my notes in here, I will show you something later that I do to kind of help me more easily see what I've taken notes on and see what's useful. But for now, we're just going to put in a title. I will probably just call this, and I always bold my titles so again I can more easily see them as I'm scrolling through, Hegemonic Masculinity, Rethinking the Concept. I don't always copy the title exactly word for word, and I'll show you why in a minute, but in this case, because it's short enough, I will, and I'll just put by Connell and Messerschmidt. And then what I actually do is I go to my Zotero tab on Word, I add a citation, and I add the citation directly in here, just a general one. And that means that I know exactly what that article is referring to. So I don't have to be exact with what I've called it, because I've got the notes at the bottom, I've got Zotero to keep track of everything. So then I go back to the article and I just start making notes on it. So I don't do any kind of highlighting. I know some people do. Let's have a look through here and see if we can find an interesting quote. So this article is basically looking at the concept of hegemonic masculinity, which Connell thought up. And basically now, with the help of Messerschmidt, they are trying to modernise the concept because it has arguably been a few years since they first created it. They're talking about how it's been adopted by a lot of people, but they think it needs to be rethought to bring it into the contemporary period. I don't feel the need to make notes on any of that, because while it's obviously context for the article, it isn't something I'm going to quote. So while it's interesting information and I understand why they've put it in the article, I don't personally feel the need to make notes of any of that. You might find this with some articles. You're not necessarily going to take notes on every single page, because some of it will be background information that either you'll already know or you find interesting and is useful to know but isn't worthy of note-taking. So this is a section that I think quite interesting. So this is one of the criticisms. So the
concept of masculinity is criticised for being framed within a heteronormative conception of gender that essentialises male-female difference and ignores difference and exclusion within the gender categories.
So all I do is I've written out the quote, use spell check to make any changes, and then I just need to find the page number. So this is on page 836. And that is how I would write down a quote. Now, if that was a quote that had been quoted by someone else, I would also note down who had quoted it, and I would add it or note it in another document I have. So I have a whole scholarship to read document. We can see that Whitehead 2002 has been quoted. If I'd find that an interesting quote, I would have been like, oh, Whitehead, someone to check out. I'd have made a note of it, and then at the end of the article, always check the bibliographies of articles you read or books, particularly if they've been very useful, because often they will quote other people or reference other people that could also be interesting to your project. You can see that this article alone has a good 4 or 5 pages of references. So what I would do is I would go to White, because that's the one I'm interested in, and we can see here Whitehead was quoted. So in 2002, Whitehead, they got that quote from Men and Masculinity's Key Themes and New Directions. So I'm like, oh, that could be an interesting book for me to look at, considering I'm looking at hegemonic masculinity and how it has been queered and how it's been portrayed in queer romance novels. So what I would then do is I would add this to the list of scholarship that I would want to read.
So I would just take that exact quotation, and I would try to keep this roughly within column 3 so I find this easier. So Whitehead, 2002, Men and Masculinities, Key Themes and New Directions, Cambridge, UK.
You may have noticed that this document is colour-coded, and I basically have a colour-coded system where I'll say it's not at UOB, so it's not available at the university I study at, so I'll either have to do an interlibrary loan or potentially get it privately. Is it an online work? Meaning, can I kind of get access to it really easily? Have I already downloaded it? So sometimes when they're online works, I will then go and download them, and I save them in a file in my computer. So I have a whole secondary sources, and again, it's split up into queer scholarship and romance scholarship. This is my romance scholarship, and then the ones I've read I put in there. So I keep them in case I want to refer back to them, but I just separate them out so I don't get overloaded. Blue is for library books, so that lets me know that it is at my library, and this kind of darker, almost blacky blue is I already own it. So those are books I own. Maybe I want to reread them. Maybe I just hadn't noticed there was something interesting. So some of these I do already own. Not many of them, because most of the ones I've already owned I have read, but sometimes something pops up and I'm like, oh, maybe I do need to reread that article, or I need to reread that book. I mean, it'd be quite easy to find out where this is from. So I copy the name, I go to the UOB library, that's always the first place I start. So I can see straight away that this is a book. It looks like it is only available as a physical book, because normally the book and the ebook will pop up quite near each other. So then I know that I can color code this as that blue color. But then another step I'm doing at the moment is I am actually creating a list of books that I don't have access to due to the library being closed at the moment. So I've called it my coronavirus list, which is very dramatic. I just put in men and masculinities. I don't bother putting the title, like the full title or the full name, and then all I do is I put the library code. And this is basically so that when I can get access to the library again, I can just go in with this list and grab all the books that are going to be useful to me. So those are kind of the first steps I go through when I'm taking notes. So I take my notes, I look through the bibliography, and then I cross-reference the bibliography with scholarship to read. Sometimes I will already have stuff, so I'll be like, oh yeah, okay, that's already on my scholarship to read. And then I find out where it is from. If it's a physical text, I add it to that list. If it's one I can download instantly, I do that. But obviously I would make normal notes than this, but I'm just going to speed it up for this process. So once I'd finished making notes, what I would do is within this document, so within this Word document, I actually then for each book or article or documentary that I quote stuff from, I create a My Notes section for. And this is my notes on what I've just read. So as well as having direct quotes, which are obviously super useful when you come to do your writing, I want to sometimes make notes on what I've just read. So I'm not as good at doing this, I'm not going to lie. It kind of comes in waves. But if we go up to, okay, so here I've got notes. So this is an article, Queers Read This, LGBT Literature Now, and I've just made some notes on it. So I briefly summarise what they're talking about, maybe pick out any like really interesting things. I found some interesting stuff, and it looks like I've mainly highlighted articles that I think will be interesting for me to look at, but ultimately I've decided this isn't very useful. Now, obviously sometimes that will be all I do with an article. But then I have a document here called PhD research, and I put it into useful and not useful. So I have useful misc, useful romance scholarship, useful queer theory, and then I have not useful. And I literally just put a little thing so that I will know what I'm talking about. And then I add my notes. So can you see if I hover over this, I've put why I find it useful. Mind map is basically just a quick way for me to see at a glance, oh, I found compulsory heterosexuality by Rich useful. And then I'm like, oh, this is the notes I took on it. So that when I'm writing a section, I don't have to scroll through that 160 page Word document. I just have to look at this, and then I can control find on this Word document Rich. So I found the article straight away. I can look at my notes. I can look at like the quotes I made. I can even look at then the notes I made on the quotes. And it basically just helps me keep track of everything, because you're going to read so much for your PhD research, especially if you're doing like an English literature, a histories, a politics, a humanities one where there's a lot of reading. You need a quick fire way to look it up, because you're not going to hold all that information in your head. If I find a piece of work particularly useful, so this was Trans by Jack Halberstein. They have arguably written one of the most seminal works on transgender studies, which is a topic I'm looking at because I'm looking at how transgender bodies, characters have been portrayed in queer romances. That is a very important piece of work for me. So I made a mind map just on that piece of text. So again, when I'm coming to write on that topic, I can instantly look at this and clearly see, okay, in this book, they discuss the history of trans as a word of identity, the transgenerational experience, other trans scholarship and what that's saying, and then the history of transsexuality. So it's just a quick way for me to look at it. I've got quotes in here, I've got some of my own comments, and I've done this for a few things. I've also done this for Bodies That Matter, kind of picking up the key themes that they looked at that I thought were relevant to my research. I like using this software because this is the SimpleMind software, because basically if I had to hand draw these mind maps, they'd get so messy and it would drive me crazy. Whereas this, I can move stuff around and I can change things if I think it looks bad. Once I've started to get a body of scholarship together, and now that I'm a little bit further on in the process, what I've started doing is I have mind maps for each of my chapters. And this is my mind map on the queer body. As you can see, it's quite large and it's not finished yet. But here, I've basically pulled together all the sources that I think relate to this topic in some way or are useful for this topic in some way. And then I tried to just put the 3 key points because I didn't want it to get overloaded. I broke the rules a little bit here, but in general, I've tried to keep the 3 key points. And these I've tried to make it so these aren't quotes. Some of them are, but I've tried to keep it to more my thoughts or how I'm engaging with it. These are the ways that I can see when I come to start writing a chapter, what are the topics that could be useful? What are the things that I need to, the key critics, what are they saying? What areas am I missing? This has actually helped me then put together a outline. So this is my queer body chapter outline. And on here, you can see I've got introduction, topics and sections I want to talk about. I've got the key scholarship, I think, for that section. So a lot of these ones in the introduction are kind of the key text that will help define this as a topic. And then I go into my section. So I'm going to do a section on queer hegemonic masculinity, which we've seen here. And these are the 3 topics I want to cover. This is kind of scholarship. And then I've got genre observations. So this is things I've picked up from my secondary reading that I think could relate back to this topic and could be engaged with in this scholarship. So I hope that has helped people. As you can see, there is a lot of different steps, and obviously those don't all happen at once, and they are things I've learned and built up over time. But I would say the key takeaways I find is using Zotero to keep my bibliography and citations in track, color coding things. I think it's really important whenever you find scholarship to see how easy you can access that scholarship and just keep a note of everything, because you'll think you'll remember but you won't. And then also, of course, I find mind maps super helpful because I love things color coded. I love things where visually I can see it. So I use mind maps a lot to help me keep track of work, but I also like the big long Word document obviously for the details, so that when I need quotes I don't have a limit on the quotes I can use. But yeah, that's obviously just how I do it. Everyone will do it slightly differently. Let me know how you do it down in the comments, and as always, give this a like and a subscribe, and I will see you next Sunday. Bye!